welcome to Simcast, a podcast brought to you by the Society for Imaging, Informatics, and Medicine.
Greetings. Welcome to another episode of Simcast. Today's episode focuses on the vendor community. As somebody that worked for vendors most of my professional life, I've always found it fascinating how well the vendors know the workflow inside the provider community, inside the hospital, those imaging workflows, all the different varieties, and so on and so forth. But that understanding only goes one way, not the other way around. So in this episode, we host a number of R&D and product management leaders from 3 vendors that have kindly agreed to shed some light on what goes on inside their walls. So please enjoy this introduction and have a little peek inside their house, so to speak. Today on the episode, we have Raghu Vemula. He's the VP of Engineering at Nuance. We have Matthieu Ferrant. He's the Director of R&D at Agfa. And Katie Puhala, a Product Manager at Ambra. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed taping it. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to start with a question/statement for everybody here. So vendors tend to understand really well what goes on inside the provider walls, inside the hospital. So what these imaging workflows look like, all the different details that go around. However, that understanding seems to only go one way, which is the vendor community understands the provider community. We'd love to have you here and tell us maybe very quickly, just to kind of scratch the surface, about generally what goes on inside the vendor community. What would you say to introduce your processes, workflows to the uninitiated? And let's start maybe with Raghu, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thanks, Mohammed. Thanks, everyone. It's true, the statement you made. So from a client perspective, they don't get to hear from vendors' walls what goes on. Behind the walls, though, from a vendor perspective, they have more than one product portfolio for the same clients, right? So same radiology clients. There's beyond the portfolio, within the product itself, there's a roadmap. There's agile Scrum teams developed to do the backlog grooming. And typically, I can speak to what we have done at Nuance for radiology. So I lead R&D, and we have teams for platform. And even within the platform, there's a continuous stream of Scrum teams which are addressing net new features. And also there's teams which are using customer escalations, Kanban kind of boards where they, based on the criticality we address. The one thing we would like the clients to understand, which I typically work with the clients to describe, is a quarterly view of what features are being already groomed and then going to go on the roadmap for that quarter. And being transparent like that puts the client at ease. Whether their feature is there or not, knowing that is helpful for them. And there are a lot of reasons why their feature may not be on the current quarter. That could be basically not of a greater interest for the larger customer base we have, or that could be much harder. There's some technology need to come up to speed before we can really build that feature and all kinds of things. So that's the backlog grooming and being transparent with the customer for features. For defect fixes, we typically handle most of the issues addressed at the customer support level, which I don't manage, but we have a support organization. They have level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of thing. And then beyond that, it gets escalated into our engineering team, which is called continuous engineering. So we manage a team which within R&D who has all the knowledge of the product where they can go ahead and fix. So there are 2 types of products for us in this. There's some products which are on-prem products where we need to go install in the hospital, and there are some cloud products. Cloud products are more agile. You can update and you can turn on, turn off feature for a given set of customers. On-prem products, which large products like PACS and other things still are on-prem. PowerScribe, earlier version is still on-prem. There's some integrations as well. So I want our clients to understand that the difficult thing is anything we are putting on the roadmap for fixing and other things, it's not directly one customer impacting. When we want to release that, we have to check with our partners whose system will be integrating with our system to validate that fix. By fixing our issue, we are not breaking some other integration. So that's what I would highlight as behind the scenes. And also, it's not just fixing and releasing. There's a regression testing, there's a security review, all those things go ahead. That's what the overhead which you would get.
Thank you very much. Matt, would you like to go next? And then maybe afterwards you can have Katie answer.
Yeah, and I think Raghu touched on a number of very important points. And I think the one thing which is critical to understand is that every customer is different. It is different because of the ecosystem of products that they work in. It is different because their workflow is different, the way they're set up, etc. And that makes it also very important to understand for us when we get these feature requests, when the people say, well, why don't you do this like this and so forth? There's many other customers. And the first level of filtering, centralization of all these requests is actually the product management teams that are actually in contact very closely with all of the customers and understand the variability that customers have in using sometimes the very same product at the first look. And then once these things get filtered and prioritized, essentially, well, it is indeed a little bit about where is the biggest clinical need, where are we going to be able to make the biggest impact for our end users, for the productivity, for the clinical confidence in our products and so forth. And then, by that prioritization, development teams are indeed picking up those features and implementing them. And again, it's also a balance with also all of the support that Raghu also mentioned. Well, how much effort you put into maintaining issues that you have on your current product line versus how much you really put into new development. And then again, one of the questions was very much, well, how come it takes so long for a feature that I requested? Does it come a feature that I requested 2 years ago is only coming now? And why do I need to do an upgrade to get that feature? Well, actually, the thing is, we cannot just provide any fix for any version that's out there. And obviously, as Raghu mentioned, if you're managing everything centrally in a cloud deployment, then it's easier to just flip the versions and upgrade customers. But it's not as trivial because indeed, as Raghu said, every customer environment is different. So there's lots of different integrations, workflows to be tested with different vendors and so forth. And that's why all these cycles from the ideation and the request coming from the customer through the actual implementation and the moment it actually can be made available to the end users is sometimes a lengthy cycle. I think that's definitely one thing I would highlight.
Katie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. In an effort to not sound like a broken record, everything that Raghu and Matt have said is definitely true. I think as a product manager, the one thing I'd want to highlight for our customers is I'm constantly speaking with customers as well as internal stakeholders. So we might get here a request somewhere along the release cycle. When it comes in, we're essentially coordinating with the rest of the product team. We're seeing what's on the schedule. Where does this fit in from a prioritization standpoint? We have other priorities coming in. We have our customer success team, our professional services team. We have marketing, sales, business development, other integrations. So it really is a balancing act. It's kind of getting that feature in, looking at everything that's on our pipeline. Our team tries to do as best as we can to understand the level of priority from our customer standpoint. But it's what we really as vendors need to do is take that priority and figure out relative to the rest of our stakeholders where that fits in. And we try to do our best to make sure that we're meeting our customers' needs. And it is definitely a difficult balancing act. I'm sure Matt and Raghu feel the same way. It's making sure, trying to keep everyone happy when everyone has different priorities.
Thank you very much to all of you for answering that question. Something that was touched on there, sometimes customers, they want to see some sort of an improvement or a change in the product. And the perception is that it takes a long time between requesting that and seeing that fulfilled in the solution. I want to kind of go at that at a few different angles. So one is, in your mind, how effective and how well is it working between getting feedback from the customer to the vendor, and how effective is that? And why is it, at least in my perception, it seems like smaller companies, maybe they have a closer ear to the customer's voice and they respond quicker and they're a bit more agile. And then as those companies tend to grow, they get lethargic and we don't see that turnaround time as quickly as they were when they were a younger organization. Maybe Matt, we'll go with you first this time.
It's an interesting thing. I think it very much depends on the complexity and the amount of users and the scale at which you deploy your application. If you think about massive implementations like an EPR, an Epic, well, there's thousands of users, and it's obviously not as easy as flipping a switch to make a change, right? And that's the one extreme. If you're a small niche AI vendor and just have one application, one algorithm that you deploy, obviously the reach and the amount of users that you can impact is much smaller. And hence also the whole cascading events of the decision making to put something in, then the implementation, making sure that you don't break something else, looking at the rest of your use cases, and then subsequently also, well, what version do you deploy this on? Obviously, typically you put out only on the most recent version. Well, that's also the bigger your install base, well, also the longer it will take for customers that have been with you for 10, 15 years to actually do these steps to go to the latest versions, because the bigger the institution, the more complex integrations you have, et cetera, the more lengthy each of these upgrades and implementations of new versions is taking, actually. And that's really regardless of the way it is deployed. It's making sure that for all of the users, for the scale, the volume of data that you ingest and that you route to and so forth, well, making sure that all these things work. And I mean, it's not uncommon that for an upgrade of a version, well, there's multiple months that are needed from the customer's perspective just to do their integrated testing before saying, well, with this version that we've received from the vendor, we're good to go. And then, they need to make sure that fits into their EMR upgrade schedule with the other vendors that they work with and so forth. And that's really part of that complexity that comes with scale, which I guess when you have a more niche application is lesser of an issue.
Thank you. And Katie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think touching upon something Matt said, my company, Ambra, our main thing is a cloud platform. So in terms of rolling out changes to customers, it is much easier. All of our customers on our public cloud are on the same version. So it's not like we have to consider, this person's 2 versions back. So that makes it a little bit easier for us. So besides the size of the company, it's really the type of platform or system you're using. Cloud-based makes that a little bit easier. In terms of turnaround times, I think I touched upon it earlier, but it is like a balancing act of all these different priorities. And then in addition to that, there's a feedback loop internally, but then there needs to be this constant feedback loop with the customer. So we're going to put something out. It would be a miracle if it was 100% what the customer is looking for. And even more to that, you might put something out and then within 2 weeks of using it, the customer realizes a use case they didn't know before until they're actually actively working on it. So from start to finish, until the customer is 100% happy with it, there could be a few iterations of that feature coming out, and that can delay things as well, kind of going back and forth with that feedback loop.
Thank you. And Raghu, any comments?
Yeah, I think Matt and Katie covered it well. It's more than small company versus big company, where some of the security and other things might come into play. Install base you have, how complex is your application, how much integration you have with the third parties, right? So all these are the variables which will slow you down. Even if you're thinking about, I'll take it in 2 stages, right? So one is feature. So you're asking for a feature, why does small company does faster when a big company takes longer? Apart from bandwidth, let's assume you have 2 engineers in this team as the same 2 engineers in smaller team as well. It is, I think, most importantly, the larger organization looks for more uniform across the base. Is this use case useful for everyone in the field? And does it need to be more mature before we can release? 3 people, 5 people shop, I want to immediately provide that feature to that customer who asked, iterate with that customer, and then roll it out for other customers. Because I'm in a growth mode of 5 to 10 customers, I can afford to second guess myself. But as a larger companies which have a little bit more market share, they try to normalize and then release. That comes across as slow. So that's beyond the regulatory things. The second aspect is also, I think this is important, when it comes to risk taking in terms of security and releasing software with some issues or something, smaller companies will take larger risk. Whereas big companies have controls in place, you need to go through the security reviews and get through all the gates for reviews, architecture reviews and everything before you can go ahead and release. Those are the additional points I would say on top of what Matt and Katie already covered.
So Katie, I want to circle back on something you touched upon earlier regarding all of the different roles in the company. Not everyone may understand the differences in the roles for customer-facing staff. Can you explain some of the differences between these different roles, like sales and account executives, application specialists, project managers, different things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I think the most logical place to start for a customer probably would be sales and account executives. So when you're talking about sales and account executives, those are obviously the people who are going out and bringing in new business. They're fostering relationships. Maybe they're finding partners via business development. They're on the less technical side of things. They're more going out and finding customers that would be a good fit for our company. I would talk about project managers and application specialists together. At least at my company, the way we view it is when a new customer comes on with us, you're going to have a project manager and an application specialist, the latter being the more technical person who actually is an expert on the platform. So they'll be the one who actually go in and configure a workflow for a customer or enable a feature or change a permission for a user. Whereas the project manager more is making sure deadlines are made and assuring that everything the customer signed up for is being met. Whereas when you get into product managers, they can be customer facing, but I would say they're less customer project specific in the sense that they are taking in either from the customer or from an application specialist or project manager, the feature requirements from the customer, and then communicating those internally and working with the developer to get those built into the platform. And then, it kind of comes full circle. Once something's done, they'll go back to the project manager, let them know, and the project manager will take it from there. So they're all working together constantly, but in terms of what their interactions are with the customer, they do differ.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add, if you look at the different roles, and specifically we think about more complex packs, and I think for speech and for Nuance, it's going to be the same. You're going to have multiple levels also of technical implementation people. The application specialists are going to be more front-facing end users, while some of the service engineers or technical integration specialists will be doing all of the plumbing in the back end. So doing some of the HL7 connectivity, setting up the modality work lists and so forth, integrating also with other applications, other archives, speech recognition systems, risk systems, and so forth. And so that's really very technical, and that's typically service engineers that will do that implementation, service engineers, technical implementations, engineers, whatever the naming is. While the application specialists are really going to be more doing the end user training, and that's clinical, but then also sometimes it's going to be technical to the tax managers or the IT managers that are actually going to be managing the system on a daily basis. So that's, I think, a little distinction in those somewhat larger scale implementations that we may see. And definitely also you're going to have some integration engineers that will be building custom integrations as well. And that's yet another group that you typically see that will do, for instance, for Nuance, they will be integrating with different platforms, and that will require some plumbing with much more dedicated than standards interfacing that the typical service engineer will do. So that's another type of role. So that's typically very important in some of the larger scale deployments that you would do.
Thank you, Matt. And that's actually a nice segue into our next question. I know you folks are all mostly on product management and R&D side, but we have to talk about this one because that's kind of where the customer usually, that's their entry point into the vendor side. It's the service side. Maybe we can start with Raghu on this one. Can quickly touch on the different levels of support, the different tiers, as well as the difference between something that a lot of people don't get is a front-end integration versus a back-end integration. Maybe you can give a quick introduction to what that looks like, just to explain what that world looks like to the customers.
Sure. Typically, we have portals where they can self-diagnose and look at what things, if they're experiencing, what resolution already is available out there. Beyond that, there's actually, they get in touch with our level 1 support engineers who, if the customer did not go through portal or existing materials, that's what the first level engineers will quickly help. And the level 1 support is that. Level 2 is where the configuration related, some other things where deep down they need to connect to the customer, actually take a look at the system kind of things they would do. And after doing that, if they cannot figure it out, that gets escalated to level 3. And that goes into the support lab where they have the similar configuration and they will, with or without customer data, will try to reproduce the issue and then address. Beyond that, if they're not able to address or they're able to reproduce, but they cannot address without code change or something, that gets escalated to engineering. So I think sometimes this is very active. The issue may not be reproduced at all and still can get escalated to development because nature of the beast is they cannot reproduce that in all these chains. Only it's occurring at the customer side. And then we engage development directly with that side to do multiple code builds with debug or additional logging or something, and then to get to the bottom of those critical issues. Finding the root causes typically takes a lot more time than fixing. So those are the 3 levels we have in support, than the self-service portal. And customer can escalate. They do sometimes if it is very critical. They reach out directly to some of our staff and then be engaged directly as well. So for any patient safety issue or something like that, they don't have to go through this formal chain.
I also confirm these 3 levels. And specifically, I think what's important to pinpoint is that the difficulty to reproduce an issue may sometimes not be as obvious to the end users and the customers because they live into a certain ecosystem, and it's impossible for us as vendors to have all the integrations that all of our customers have and all the possible permutations and integrations and so forth. And that's really the trickiest thing with those issues that get to those levels that indeed they have to be tackled by R&D. These things are sometimes you cannot have a fix immediately. You just have to put in a patch that will just provide additional logging or that type of things. And it's really that level of difficulty of these combinations that we don't always can reproduce in-house that is making some of the fixes very difficult to provide to end users.
So one question I do have kind of follows along this idea of dealing with the integrations. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in AI and there's a lot of small vendors in the market. Are you guys anticipating increased difficulty with third-party integrations as time progresses? What are you guys doing to mitigate that in your own products? Do you guys see a coalescence of smaller companies that will help reduce this integration issue? You know, we have connect-a-thons, we have different things already in place to help with those situations, but you guys still have to do stuff on your end before you arrive to connect-a-thon too. Matt, maybe you can kick us off on that one.
Indeed, there's really a lot of small companies that are emerging that are doing similar stuff, yet we don't have complete standardization on how to send back results. And for instance, if you want to do reprioritization of work lists, well, every vendor is going to have a different way of communicating the results of the findings back, whether it is for a stroke, for a lung nodule. There's no real coded standard way that will get these results back to our systems to just do the reprioritization of work list. Even just imaging results like detected contouring, well, sometimes it's going to be a GSPS, sometimes it's going to be a segmentation mask, sometimes it's going to be something really proprietary or a new series. And at this point, talking about connectathons, we're very limited with the standards as they are right now. And adding these is going to be a challenge, especially for customers that actually want to have best of breed algorithms from a lot of vendors or including from own internal development. And that really calls for more standardized communications standards and APIs for making that level of integration much more easy for the smaller companies, but also for the end customer and the major PACS vendors for sure.
Yeah, one comment I would make is AI is in infancy. Like you said, Prashant, a lot of small companies just building algorithms and then trying to bring you the market. ACR and others we are working with them to define the findings and clinical findings, how they can be codified such that that JSON file, that format, can consistently represent whether it's vendor A, vendor B, who is an AI vendor, who are providing these results. It flows through PACS systems and reporting systems, same way with a clinical semantic information as opposed to a bunch of numbers. So that standard is evolving. Beyond that standard, I think today's algorithm developers, they're quick. They're not engineers per se for clinical integration application engineers. They're AI data science folks. They will build quickly algorithm and a container which can put out some numbers or classification kind of things. When it comes to using those things inside PACS or inside our reporting systems, it takes a lot more. They need to be given standards. Not only that, when they are producing, there's no boundary of only this kind of data we will accept, right? When you really put it in production, we expected this thickness of slice, but you guys are giving bigger. Or we want only with contrast or without contrast. So all these things become external to that algorithm, which requires a lot more per algorithm or per app-based customizations, which need to evolve. You cannot explain it away to an organization which purchased an app, AI app, that we work on only these type of studies. Our algorithm doesn't handle this because we have not seen it. That's not good enough. So those are the kind of things. AI industry as a whole is in infancy. It's just getting there.
Yeah, I think just on that point in terms of AI being in its infancy, I think there are a lot of new companies cropping up right now, and there's a lot of different avenues they're pursuing. But I also would say there's not one necessarily that has become the industry standard. So from like a vendor standpoint, when we're looking at who should we be integrating with, what are our customers interested in doing, I think it can be hard to choose the right company. So we might go out and integrate with this awesome AI company we think adds a lot of value. We show our customer, they say, hey, that's great. Can you integrate with this other company that does a very similar thing, but we are more interested in them? So I think there is a lot to be said on this new thing. There's a lot of avenues to be explored. There's just knowing which direction to go in has been really interesting, and knowing which company to plug and play with. I will say, having these smaller companies, I do find they're easier to integrate with in the sense that there's quicker turnaround times. They might have less partners they're working with. So it is a bit easier to turn around and produce something with these vendors. But yeah, figuring out for our customers where the market's going. And a lot of people are interested in AI, but they're not necessarily applying it in their clinical workflows just yet.
The other challenges that we're going to be seeing is, okay, it might be easy to just do your first integration, go live, but then you have the whole evolution of versions. Well, is that small company just going to be mindful of all of the partners they've integrated with as they write their new versions? That's where, standardizing these APIs and making sure that you're not breaking something when you're upgrading one side or the other side is going to be the big challenge. I think when some of the hospitals are going to have 10, 20, 30 of these integrations, how can we ensure that you don't have to retest all of those before you go live? Because that adds another level of complexity in all of these projects that are already very complex today.
Yeah, I think beyond integration, which is one of the points, is the quality of the results, which I know, a number of them will get FDA regulation before they can be used in clinical setting, is for the end client, their ability to validate with their own data using these apps is becoming more critical. So however you expose this AI algorithms to the end user, you need to provide them some way for them to validate these AI algorithms on their own data. I think that's one of the key requirements we are finding as we integrate more and more partners into our marketplace.
So it sounds like standardization is a huge issue. Maybe we need AI-com like DICOM. And clearly, Jason, you got to champion this. So I'm going to pivot to you, our soon-to-be AI-com chair, for the next question.
Thank you, dear Prasant. I'll wear that chair well. I was just going to pivot a bit. I guess along that lines with small vendors that are creating algorithms at a fast pace and kind of taking that in a different angle, I'm curious how important it is to have the latest new feature or the kind of that new thing, since it is very replicatable and it can be done. If one vendor has the new shiny toy, it can be replicated quite easily. I'm just curious, I guess, how important it is to be on that cutting edge and to be the pioneer of that new workflow or that new piece of technology.
Yeah, since it's in infancy, Jason, I think initial stages and that as it is evolving pretty quickly, people would expect that latest, right? So if your efficacy is 75% in one of the algorithm, 80%, and then some other partner comes up with, or the same partner comes up with a 95% efficacy, you don't want to lose time between those two. So you want to jump on the new version of that sooner than later, especially if you're using it in the clinical setting. And we all know the radiologists, the false positives are hitting them and it's actually hindering them as opposed to helping them, and they would stop using.
Back to Jason's original question, I would say, I think a lot of companies in this space that are dealing with DICOM and imaging transfer and HL7 support, PACS, VNA, there is a lot of overlap in core functionality. So being able to integrate with some of these new companies and give our customers who are using us for clinical workflows something new to use us for, new use cases, is what keeps our customers around and stops people from jumping to another company that just put out, I said, a new shiny toy. So we might have a customer using us for image exchange, but if we integrate with this new AI company, they may consider us for a research PACS or a more clinical trial workflow. And that's how you keep your customers happy and around. If you're not pursuing these avenues, other companies will. And you have to show that you're willing to plug and play, because that is where I think this industry is going right now.
All right, thank you for that. So with that being said, I do have a follow-up question. How do the significant barriers to entry in the healthcare technology space inform the development cycle? Is it harder to take risks? Is there less incentive to maintain and improve products versus finding new offerings to sell new products? Maybe we can start with you, Matt, if you'd like.
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, the thing is that at some point, if you want to deploy diagnostic products into the market, well, you have to comply with those regulations. And that means that you have to have a quality system in place that imposes a number of gateways into your development cycles. I think Raghu already alluded to this in earlier discussions. And once that's set up and you have a methodology to just tackle that, I don't believe it's a big hinder. It is overhead for sure, because you need a number of roles. You need to make sure that a number of tools are in place to make sure that you go through all of the procedures that you've set yourself as a quality standard. But I think overall, it is not specifically that which is hindering. I think it's more making sure that you don't build a product just for a single customer or a couple of customers, but you have something that is replicatable across a bigger install base. That is the biggest hindering factor. And plus then, as you scale up, well, obviously it's the balance between, building the next shiny, new and exciting feature versus making sure that you keep your bread and butter install base of customers also happy.
Yeah, I think one of the things to consider in healthcare entry is, at least in my 2 decades experience, is look at the workflow when you're introducing some product, right? Any product, if it's significantly changing the workflow, what it is there today, you are going to have uphill battle. And you need to fit into the workflow and bring in the value in terms of cost reduction or higher revenue or higher productivity. So that's one of the things we take into account every time when we try to introduce something in the workflow, either for radiologists, pathologists, or other regular providers. So that's the key. And shiny toy per se, even AI, when you're looking at it, I don't want to call out a particular company here, but typically if you build a separate application to provide AI value for a particular study, even if it is a high value cancer solution or anything, that won't go anywhere because people are not going to launch yet another application to get only for 2 studies out of 100 they read to get the value of AI. You need to be able to have that AI value flow into the existing clinical workflow, whether it's EMR, PACS, or a radiology reporting system, or any of those systems which they're already using. That's one of the view we had. Even with the disruption, you want to bring in the disruption into existing workflow to improve productivity and value for the client.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're going to pivot in a different direction here. And I'm curious, so looking at things from a global perspective and not just from a US perspective, I'm curious about how the markets differ. Policy can drive some of these differences in how the product may look in Europe versus America, or Canada versus the United States. So I'm curious about, from your perspective, is it more attractive to develop kind of a US market or a foreign market? And how does that impact or affect the development and the shape that the product takes?
Definitely Europe, obtaining CE mark, whether it's for algorithms or new products, etc., has much less overhead and is easier than obtaining FDA approval, whether it's for an algorithm or just a new feature in your viewer, etc. The validation requirements, the statistical studies that are required were much less stringent than with the FDA. With the upcoming MDR, it is going to get closer to what FDA requires, but not quite yet exactly the same. So definitely, and that's what you're seeing, is that a lot of CAD vendors, for instance, start actually with some studies in Europe, start deploying it at sites much earlier than actually they can for clinical production in the US, just to be very clear. And Health Canada is also a slightly easier process to get approval from than the FDA, typically for diagnostic tools, that's for sure.
Okay, so if I may maybe help close up things here a little bit. Thank you all for giving this introduction, allowing us to look inside your house, so to speak. For the SIM members who are listening to this podcast, how can they help vendors with product improvements, beta testing, ideas, feedback, UI testing? How do we work together? How do we make this better for everybody? And maybe we can start with you, Katie.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Absolutely, all of that obviously sounds really helpful. I think figuring out the best way to do it is an interesting task for all of us to figure out. Sort of, when do you bring in a non-customer, in the sense of when during a release cycle or when you're working on these larger features, when does it make sense to bring in a SIM member, for example, to help with this beta testing and get ideas? Something that we're trying to roll out right now is getting more product surveys, but I do think there needs to be more of a push in terms of sitting down with these users and actually walking them through step by step. This is what we're developing. Here's what we're looking for. And so I think we should definitely start conversations, forming user groups. We have our own sort of customer user group, but getting as much insights as possible never hurts, because you don't want to get siloed just based on the small group you're talking to consistently. So getting the various ideas from a larger community would be amazing.
If I may jump in here, we would certainly like to have SIM members either join our user group or separate group. We get feedback. Right now, we have, Katie pointed out, we have our own client-based focus groups and client executive council who come in and provide us guidance every other quarter. And also we have members from ACR and RSNA who we go to get feedback. So in that regard, I think SIM members would serve a certainly greater need for us in terms of giving feedback.
I think definitely when it comes to clinical validation of new features, new concepts, etc., it's always a little bit of a challenge. You have your pilot sites that you work with, but obviously the broader base of end users that you can confront something with ahead of your release, the more value it is. And sometimes it's a little delicate because sales doesn't want you to start showing the next thing until you know for sure that they're buy it. And if you show it, well, the risk is they'll want it. And if you cannot deliver it within 6 months, they won't want to talk to you. So it's a little bit that's challenge that you have with your existing customer base that is sometimes would be nice if we could bridge with an external group of experts that would very neutrally be able to help you and provide you with feedback on evaluating new features, from doing some reads and that type of things. Yes.
Well, this has been awesome, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. As we're kind of wrapping things up, I would like to see if you guys have any of their final thoughts on the overarching theme of this talk, being the lack of knowledge of what goes on in the background at the vendors and what you guys absolutely love for your customers to know and have a better understanding of what you guys do. Raghu, we can start with you.
Thanks, Prashant. In the regard of trying to address customer needs, either it is a new feature or a particular issue they're facing, we are trying to address for them. First and foremost, knowing our end, trying to understand the feature better, understand the issue better. So in those two areas, actually, clients can help us immensely. Being more clearer about what the issue is. Radiologists won't be able to explain what the issue is, but the local administrator who is working with them can get more details and precise such that it makes it easier for us to address faster. Same thing for the feature as well. I know we will have multiple interviews, but thorough thought through inside the client institution workflow by the client would help us immensely. And the last point I would make is, as vendors, if we are more transparent about our processes, where we are in our roadmap, it will help clients immensely that they understanding us such that the expectations can be set properly. So I will stop at that. So that's what I think will help both sides.
I can just also only expand on what Raghu said, in the sense that understanding the workflow, the context, the clinical use case, getting more than just a question, well, I'd like this button to do this, or can you do just this? Often, they just try to find a solution to a problem instead of explaining the problem that they're trying to solve. And that's really the key for us, is better understanding the workflow, the clinical use case, the productivity challenge, more than just, I would like this button to do this and this and this. That's really very much added value for us. And that we sometimes miss, and it's difficult to just convey that message. So definitely that would help.
Yeah, I think personally, I would be curious on hearing from my customers more, even just the SIM community, on how vendors can be more transparent in a useful way. Because I think we all probably feel like we do a pretty good job, but the reason we're all here today is it is a bit of a black hole. You know, you're a customer, you ask for something, you might not hear about it for whatever reason for X months, then all of a sudden your project manager comes back and says, hey, that feature you requested X months ago is now live and ready to be used. So I think I would be really interested to hear any ideas that people have on that experience as, you know, as my company's getting bigger, especially when you're getting to a bigger company. How can you maintain that level of transparency? And then I think the second point is something that I think would be great to start doing more is actually, and I think Raghu and Matt touched on this, is really actually observing a user using the platform or even another system. Like, what are they doing in the viewer? What are they clicking? How do they use the tools? Because someone explaining it to you can be very useful, but you might not fully understand what someone's doing or what they're looking for until you're actually sitting and watching someone sharing their screen, or even if you're lucky enough, sitting next to a doctor actually interacting with various systems.
Awesome. Thank you guys again. This has been another episode of Simcast. Have a great day.
Simcast has been brought to you by the Society of Imaging Informatics in Medicine. Please visit our website at siim.org for more information and educational content, including webinars and an archive of prior episodes. Please follow us on Twitter at sim_tweets. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support.